Any investors in the room? Raise your hands. Come on, don't be shy. I'm not going to pitch you, okay? I just wanted to ask you whether you are about to invest in any billion-dollar company. And you may say, how on earth do I know? Well, it's not easy to identify them, is it? So our next guests are going to give us some tips about this subject. Cool, right? He is a founder, CEO, and investor based in Portland, Oregon, although he calls himself an ecopreneur. He has worked off on one motto instilled at him at a young age: be the change you want to see in the world. He says, live well, do good. And he also says that the trick is making money and doing something positive. Sure, we want to know more about it, so please, let's welcome Kristofor Lofgren. Welcome, Kristofor. There he is. Take a seat, thank you. It is a real thrill for me to introduce the moderator of this talk, precisely on this arena stage at South Summit. Despite being now the head of Campus Madrid at Google, she will always be the heart and soul of South Summit. A journalist by profession, an entrepreneur by heart, she co-founded South Summit along with Maria Benjumea, so she's responsible for all of us being here today, as she has sailed this huge ship from the beginning, right at the moment where things were the toughest. No wonder Google came along and stole her away. So please, let's give the warmest welcome to Sofia Benjumea. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. How's the energy on the second day? Good? Woo. I don't see anything, so shout or say something. So it's a pleasure to be here with you, Kristofor. We met yesterday to actually get to know each other and be able to and have a casual conversation today, and I think it's everyone wants. So Kristofor is the founder and CEO of Bamboo Sushi, the first sustainable sushi restaurant, and he calls himself an ecopreneur, but I think what many people call you is a consummate creator. You told me that your grandfather was an inventor. I think it's a word that we're not using anymore, but I loved you saying that. But Kristofor views business as the ultimate platform to impact positive change in the world. That's what he's doing as an entrepreneur, but also as an investor, because he stays true to himself, and he's been an early investor in Tesla and SolarCity, for example. Let's start with your phase as entrepreneur. How does a failed environmental law student ends up launching a sushi restaurant that you have 7 now, planning on having 90 in the next 5 years?
We've got really ambitious growth plans. We're going through our Series A right now to scale up to probably 50 locations in the next about 3.5 years, and then continuing to ramp from there with 90 set by 2022.
But this is not just a restaurant, you're revolutionizing the food industry.
Yeah, we want to take, so seafood, I know that we're in Spain and a lot of people like food, so we'll get into it real quick. Seafood's the widest traded commodity by weight in the world. And so we looked at that problem and said, essentially if you're going to feed 11 billion people, you have to have seafood being a main part of the conversation. And nobody was really tackling it because it's a very complex and very opaque industry with a lot of lack of transparency and unsustainability in the supply chain. So we felt it was a perfect opportunity as an entrepreneur to tackle something that was large, very outdated, very old, and needed a lot of assistance to kind of turn around. And so our focus is, as we scale the restaurants, we completely go back up the value chain and change the entire supply chain for sustainable seafood globally.
And how are you doing that? I mean, what's the difference? Like, you told me you knew most of your suppliers personally.
So we know all of them. A lot of it is just, the very simple thing of where you spend your money is the largest impact that we all make on a daily basis. Obviously, starting a great company, if anybody in this room can do that, is fantastic, and that's a huge impact. But how we spend our money every day in a capitalist market is the most important thing we do. And so as a company, if we can become the largest seller of sustainable seafood in the world, that really changes the entire model and the entire trend. Similar to what Tesla is doing for the electric car, they're not necessarily the largest car company in the world, but they're getting every car company in the world to start paying attention to electric cars and electrification of vehicles. They're an agitator, and that's essentially what we're going to do as well. So we are going to change the way people eat.
Right, and you were talking a little bit more to go one more on your phase as like entrepreneur. You were talking about seeing food but seeing food as a medicine, and I think we're going through that trend. How do you see that?
So I think that, we were talking last night, one of my core beliefs is that you have to invest in the inevitable. And I think it's inevitable that people in my generation and younger want to know where their food comes from. They want to have food that's affordable, and they want to have food that's healthy. And people are starting to understand now through, biotech and other things how to, smartwatches, people are monitoring their health in a different way than ever before. They're taking it into their own hands. And so with that, I think that it's an inevitability that food as medicine, going all the way back to Hippocrates' famous quote, I think that it's an inevitability that will become much more mainstream. So we've had basically food as taste profile for the last 1,000 years. And we're moving more in industrialized societies, I think, now towards a food as medicine. Food as medicine is definitely something seen in smaller, rural, tribal areas of the world, but very rarely in, globalized, fully developed economies. But we are now starting to see that trend in food. The fastest growing segment, even though, again, small numbers obviously grow faster than large numbers, but the fastest growing segment of the products industry right now is actually vegan, plant-based products. It's growing at over 100% a year. So I think that there's a huge trend going in that direction where people are starting to recognize that food causes heart disease, food causes cancer, food causes diabetes, obesity, hypertension, lack of focus, lack of energy. So food is really important, and we feel that, and not to mention the largest environmental impact you can make in the world is actually not buying an electric car or solar panels, even though those are two of my big passions. It's actually what you eat or don't eat. So removing land-based animals from your diet, having a low-impact diet is actually very important. So that's kind of our focus, and that's why we feel that food as medicine is kind of the next step.
What would you say has been, as an entrepreneur, the key to your success, if you could pick one thing?
Not giving up, because everybody tells you to give up. And that's what, at least as an investor, I always look for in entrepreneurs is everybody's going to tell you you can't do it. Everybody's going to tell you you shouldn't do it. And that's, generally speaking, the sign that you should do it. And you have to just keep getting back up and up and up and up if you know you have a great idea. Sometimes it's important to stop and pivot, as the speaker 2 speakers ago said, but for the most part, if you know you have a great idea, it takes a lot of tenacity to get there.
Perseverance,
yeah.
Resilience. Now let's back to your, Kristofor as an investor. You started in San Francisco, then you somehow connected to Silicon Valley. What was your first investment, and why? What brought you to actually say, I also want to be?
My first investment so I did real estate development as a teenager. I got into it by accident through a family friend and really loved it, but found it kind of soulless and mindless. And I wanted to have more intellectual stimulation through my investments. And so I'm obsessed with cars. I have been since I was a kid. My grandfather used to race cars, and so it's been in our blood for a long time. And I saw this, ad that came up, I think then on AOL, because this was 2005. I remember I was on a desktop, and it was this beautiful red car, and it was the world's fastest electric car. And I remember seeing it, and it was going to go to Concours d'Elegance, which for anybody who doesn't know is one of the world's foremost car shows in Monterey Bay and Pebble Beach. And I said, man, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I want to get involved with that company. And it turned out to be Tesla, and Elon Musk at that time. I don't even think he was the CEO. Martin Eberhard was still the CEO, and Elon was just an investor. And I just felt like they were answering a lot of the questions that people, electric cars are slow, they're ugly, they don't have range, they blow up, they're, unsafe. And they were like, we're going to make the fastest, safest, longest range, most beautiful car ever made. Oh, and by the way, it happens to be electric. Not leading with the electric thing first, like GM had done. And so I said I want to be involved in this, and had a friend who was helping them create essentially stock offerings through Goldman Sachs, which was a big partner of theirs at the time, and so got involved, and kind of that was probably the first investment.
Okay, so you managed to actually get into that deal through a friend.
Through a friend, yeah. We talked about this last night. Having friends is the most important thing as an entrepreneur. It's like they save your life when you're eating ramen like soup and needing a couch to sleep on, or if you have to borrow money or anything like that. You want to have friends who can help you and friends you can help. I think that's one of the biggest things as an investor and also as an entrepreneur I see is how can I help my friends? And then hopefully in return, if there's ever a time where I need them, how can they help me? And oftentimes the help I'm usually looking for is either an introduction or an opportunity to invest in a really great company that is usually closed off to the public. And so, yeah.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about that and how we always talk about the ecosystem, the community, and suddenly sometimes it seems like empty words, but it's really about relationships. And you were saying most of the deals I've entered in has been through connections, through trust that I know.
All of them, yeah. All of them I've gotten to know the founders or the CEOs or somebody on the executive team very well. All of them have been investments in people that are mission driven, so they have a greater sense of purpose than making money and seeing a market opportunity. I would say if you meet an entrepreneur who wants to make money, I would run the other way, because people who want to make money don't make a lot of money. People who want to change the world make billions and billions of dollars, because they're not, if you wanted to make a lot of money, you stop at 10 million, 100 million, some number that's reasonably small in the grand scheme of things. Bill Gates didn't set out to become the richest man in the world. He wanted to change the world and then became the richest man consequently because of that. Same thing goes for every person on that list. Elon's another perfect example. He went almost bankrupt doing what he believed in. That's the kind of person you want to invest in, because the odds of success are very low no matter what company you invest in. But if you're going to invest in an entrepreneur like that, the tenacity comes back, because it's not about money. It's not about their comfort. It's about doing something that's inside of them that they have to release, almost like an artist in a way, like that has to paint or has to sculpt. They have to create this. They have to see the vision come to life. And I think if you, also as an entrepreneur, if you don't have that, you're probably going to be pretty miserable, because a lot of the days really suck. So
yeah, you better be passionate about it.
You have to be really passionate about it.
One more thing is, how do you say, from investing in Tesla, investing in Solar City, but what would you say that is your investment thesis? What brings you into a deal?
So number one, I think it's a common saying in Silicon Valley is you invest in the entrepreneur, not the product. I take a little bit of issue with that, because I think that the product obviously has to be right time and the right product. So if we take Tesla as an example, first thing you have to do is analyze the entrepreneur. I believed very strongly from the day that I got to first be introduced to Elon and the team that he was the next Steve Jobs. Everybody was mentioning Jack Dorsey at the time, and Jack's an amazing entrepreneur, but I just felt like there was something very special about Elon. His way of speaking and his thinking process was very different, and he could take very, very complex and large problems and distill them down into sentences. And I think that was the thing that Steve Jobs did so well, was he made these very complex, grand ideas very simple, and then delivered them to people in the way that they were hoping for. So my investment thesis is find an entrepreneur that is mission-driven, find somebody who is essentially has a reasonable level of fear, but is basically fearless. So they're fearful enough to not be stupid and frivolous, but they're basically unafraid of all of the challenges that will come, and find somebody who has an insanely high pain tolerance. I oftentimes say that the success that a person has in their life is correlated directly with the amount of suffering that they're willing to endure. I think political candidates are a good example of that. I mean, becoming president of the United States is not an easy task no matter who you are, and you get beat up pretty badly on both sides. And so you're willing to go through a lot of suffering to attain essentially the highest job in the land. And so I think it's no different for an entrepreneur. So I want to find those things. And then from a product standpoint, is the product great? Is it actually needed? Is it another, photo sharing app, or is it actually something that's really moving the needle in the space? First to market doesn't always matter. What matters more is the Apple philosophy of do it better than everybody else. and understand the market first. And then the last thing is timing. Electric cars have been around since the 80s, and just nobody, gave a crap about electric cars in the 80s and 90s. We didn't have an understanding of climate change the way we do today. I don't think people really cared as much about those types of speeds, and obviously electric cars sucked. So that was the other thing too. Whereas now the capacity for batteries, battery storage.
The timing was right.
The timing was right. So yeah, that's the last one.
I also heard you talk about, as an investor, you have to think about what can you offer. And I would like to ask you, what are you offering? And let's put the example of Tesla. What have you brought to the table in the Tesla endeavor?
So for me, being a service experience-focused guy from a restaurant background, and I think that's how my nature is. I really like to create experiences for people. I get a tremendous amount of joy out of giving Christmas gifts. I like getting them too, but I love giving them more and setting things up for people. Tesla had a world-class product, but it didn't really have a full concept or grasp of service. The gentleman who was put in charge of service became a friend of mine, and we would talk about sort of what the bar was supposed to be. And originally Tesla's bar was, we want to be as good as Lexus. Lexus has kind of, Toyota in general has had the bar in the auto industry for decades now as far as quality, consistency, customer service. And I challenged them to have the bar be the Four Seasons Hotel Group. When you talk about service, customer service, the Four Seasons is kind of held as the global gold standard of service. And, Lexus is held as the standard for the auto industry, which is like saying my favorite person is my dentist or something, right? It's like nobody really wants to go to the dentist, but you're happy that you're getting your teeth cleaned. So I think that, having them kind of shift their mentality around customer first, creating experiences. How do you deliver the keys like we were talking about last night? How do you open up the factory to people so they can see inside of the walls? How do you give away all the charging stations to great hotels and restaurants and things like that? Was a big creation that we did early on, the destination charging program, to be able to get people who had the cars into beautiful places, and to get people with beautiful places getting Tesla customers who are obviously affluent and progressive and innovative people. So just trying to kind of make all of those things put together in a package that would allow them to really step outside of the car industry and just think about changing the way that customers engaged with the product.
Yeah, yesterday you were also saying that at the very beginning, one also cool thing to be actually an early investor in Tesla was to be a beta tester of the cars.
It's
but
made
you
my
actually
wife a little nervous.
Did not fit, actually, no?
No, the first car they tried, of course, was the Roadster. One of the heads of sales for Tesla is a big fan of my restaurant company. And at the time, I only had one restaurant. And he would come in all the time with his wife, and then one day I get this email, and he's like, "Hey, I love your sushi, and by the way, given your sustainability, you need to have this $150,000 orange Roadster." And I was like, I don't know if my employees are really going to like that, and okay, bring it by the restaurant, I want to see it. And so
I'll see it anyway.
I'll see it, I'll check it out. And so I did, and I didn't fit in it because I'm 6'6", I found this out, I'm 198 centimeters for the conversion. So it was a large person, a great car, but it just was a little too early for me, given what I had to spend and what I needed, and I needed more than one car, and $150,000 was a lot to spend for a guy with one restaurant, and an early investment in a company that had very little revenue. So I waited, and then eventually when the Model S came out, that was my car. And then early on, I was the first person outside of the company to get to test the autopilot feature, where the car drives itself, which was, my wife has a great story about that. We were driving down Highway 1, and they're like, I get this email, and they're like, okay, you can't tell anybody. It's coming out in like 6 to 8 months. And I'm like, okay, great. And I flick it on, and I'm like, oh my God, the car's driving itself. I have a video of us. And my wife is like, what are you doing? And she's like freaking out in the passenger seat, and the car doesn't realize that there's a turn. They hadn't figured out how to navigate the lanes yet. So we just started going. I had to stop before we went off a cliff. And I just wrote them back and was like, need to work on turning assistance immediately.
Feel basic. No?
Yeah, and they were like, it reads the lanes. And they were like, did it have any yellow lines? I was like, there's no yellow lines. They were like, oh, we need to change the camera system. I'm like, cool, good talk. So
thank you for being the rabbit. No?
It's really great. It's a program now that we have at Tesla called the Early Adopter Program, which now has started for other people so they can beta test in large quantities, which is one of the things that's very innovative about the company was getting that feedback and recognizing that they're not going to be able to solve all of the problems. So again, modeling it after another great company, Apple with the app developer. So obviously, if you're a developer for Apple, you get the new software many, many months in advance of everybody else. Create a community, everybody goes through it, they destroy it, they say this sucks, this doesn't work, etc., blah, blah, blah. They put their app on it and they work through it so that when launch happens, hopefully it's as seamless as possible. And so Tesla's working on a very similar thing so that by the time they roll out new updates on the software, it's able to just click on and go, and you're not going to almost run off the highway.
And is there anything you can tell us about what's next for Tesla, or what's next for Elon?
I can't, because I would be debarred and destroyed as a thing.
No one's listening.
But yeah, nobody's listening. This will never be recorded. It's just you and me. Everybody knows about the truck. The truck is coming. I will tell people that the truck is better than people think it's going to be. And I mean that very sincerely, not like as a hype man, but like I was really shocked at the claims. I was like, all right, like, is the range really going to be revolutionary? Is the speed really going to be revolutionary? Is the cost per hour, which is how trucking works, it's $1 per hour essentially calculation. And so when you have a diesel truck and you look at it $1 per hour, that's how they're calculated in terms of the efficiency. And let's just say it's gonna change the trucking industry, I think, in a very real way, and I think people are kind of sleeping on that product. So the cars are amazing, the cars are great, the cars are everything, they're really cool. But honestly, the future of the company is in battery storage, solar production, and probably trucking. The thing that people are most excited about is the cars. So it's kind of like they keep that out there to get everybody pumped, but then the revenue and the growth of the company is really going to be in large industrial complexes.
Two more questions. One is, like, you also invested in SolarCity. Where do you see the energy industry going?
I think it's going to be what we're seeing now. I think it's going to be distributed energy. I think, more and more, I'm putting the solar shingles on my house. I'm actually doing a large remodel right now in my home and taking it completely off the grid. So I want it to be net zero, so it's getting all the power walls in it, and it's getting the solar panels on the tiles. And I think that if they can continue creating the production that they're doing now at the scale that they need to, which will bring the cost down for the installation, I think that it will be a revolutionary product. The biggest hurdle that they have right now is producing those glass panels consistently with the right amount of conversion for the cells at the price point necessary to get scale. Because it's a very, very, very complicated process to be able to produce the glass that looks like that. That's why they're starting with the simpler ones. But overall, I really believe in their capacity. I mean, they have the smartest people in the world coming to work for them. So I think energy goes back to the people in a way. And the grid will still exist, but the grid needs to be upgraded, and energy will kind of flow through it. I think you're seeing it sort of modeled as everything, where, the cell phone has decentralized commerce, and now every person can have a business. Every person can use Square and set up credit card transactions tomorrow. Every person can have a storefront and sell things on Shopify. There's all these different companies that are essentially democratizing that, and I think that energy will be no different.
And just one more on SolarCity and the product. I mean, you were talking about how the product, again, they did a beautiful product when kind of solar panels were just kind of not the thing you want to have in your backyard. But again, they're surrounded by a service. I mean, did you bring that also? And what does it look like?
I had nothing to do with the SolarCity thing at all. That was just an investment. I really believed in Elon by that time and the team, and was able to get in again early, which was great. And I believed in his vision of what he wanted to do, because he's a guy who really believes in design first. And so I knew that eventually they would come up with something that was cool, even though they were just an idea. And they're really cool. So, yeah.
Okay. And just to finish, wanted to know, you were talking about invest in the inevitable. Mm-hmm. What do you think will be your next inevitable?
That's a good question. Right now, I'm just really focused on, my goal is to build the largest socially and environmentally responsible food company in the world. So not just restaurants, but we really want to get into all verticals of food. So whether it's production, manufacturing, products, restaurants, hotels, food service. I want to change the food industry globally. I think it's time that everybody had access to food, and we have the ability to feed the entire planet. We're just not being intelligent about how we're using the land.
Okay. Thank you so much. I hope
you
enjoy your time you spend in Spain.
Yeah,
I think
thank you.
we're well known for our gastronomy, so I hope
Yeah, the food
you
in this
get to
country is
enjoy
amazing.
a little. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you
you.
all.
Thank you so much.